The other great manufacturer of the 20s and 30s was that of Ettore Bugatti, the most illustrious member of a dynasty of very talented craftsmen who established himself in the Alsace area of France, having emigrated from Italy. An expert in engineering, the family's creative streak led him to design his cars as works of art. His masterpiece was certainly the incomparable Type 35, which, from 1924, was the first production Grand Prix car. Over a decade, around 400 models in various versions were produced. In the latter half of the 20s and early 30s, the Type 35s made up the majority of the field, either driven by professionals or amateurs. And it was thanks to this car and its variations that Bugatti has one of the most illustrious records in Grand Prix racing, on a par with Alfa Romeo, Ferrari, Lotus and McLaren. The Type 35 made its debut at the European Grand Prix at Lyon in 1924. The regulations allowed for a maximum engine capacity of 2 litres and a minimum weight of 560 kilos. The Bugattis were immediately the sensation of the field with their lightness, balance and aesthetically pleasing shape and size. There were several innovations, not the least their cast aluminium wheels, whereas everyone else used wire wheels. But these proved to be the team's downfall in this European Grand Prix, for the wheels required special tyres, which had not been sufficiently tested beforehand. But this was only a temporary setback. Ettore Bugatti's masterpiece would go on to win many races in the years to come. Bugatti eschewed the supercharger to begin with, and the Type 35's original 2-litre straight-8 engine, however beautiful it may have been, only developed around 100 horsepower, while its rivals, thanks to supercharging, developed considerably more. The fact that the Type 35s were able to challenge cars with perhaps 50% more power was thanks to their excellent road holding. However, in the end, Bugatti followed the trend and took the supercharging route as well. So the Type 51 of the early 30s had a 2.3-litre engine which gave 170 horsepower. Even so, the Bugattis continued to be competitive thanks to their easy inbuilt simplicity, which made them not only efficient on all types of circuit, but also allowed amateurs to buy them and race them with success during these crazy years. Fifi Étincelin and his legendary cap worn back to front was the archetypal gentleman driver of the period, typical of the driver who found success in the 30s in spite of not being in a factory team. Chiron, Varzi were also helped on their way by driving Bugattis, while René Dreyfus, Robert Benoit and the Williams were among so many others who found themselves behind the wheel of one of these agile machines, neither revolutionary nor very advanced, but which benefited sufficiently from the simple mechanical intuition of the man who designed them. While the production side of Bugatti's racing was one of his company's more lucrative operations, Mercedes' involvement in Grand Prix racing was all about the company's and its nation's image. That was why the German firm's participation was only occasional, unlike Bugatti's before the war and Ferrari's after the war. In all, Mercedes launched 3 well-reasoned offensives, 2 before the 2 world wars, largely for propaganda reasons, and 1 in the 50s to demonstrate that after the defeat and destruction, the company and country were back on their feet again. But apart from the motivation involved, there was also one fascinating characteristic which linked these 3 periods, and that is that they were all very successful. No other major manufacturer so successfully obliterated the opposition each time they went racing. The first chapter of this trilogy covered 1914. Mercedes hadn't had much success against Renault and Fiat between 1906 and 1908, but now returned in force for the French Grand Prix. Peugeot, revolutionary with brakes on all 4 wheels, were the favourites, while the 4.5-litre German cars were more conventional with brakes on only the rear wheels. But it was the latter team that won, the tough cars finishing 1st, 2nd and 3rd. A few weeks later, war broke out, and only the memory and significance of that victory remained. The second chapter began with the arrival to power of Hitler in 1933. Immediately, the Führer encouraged German manufacturers to start building Grand Prix cars, which would demonstrate that the Third Reich was capable of dominating Europe. The famous Dr. Ferdinand Porsche designed the revolutionary Auto Union, with its V16 engine mounted between the driver's back and the rear axle. Mercedes, however, went for a more conventional design, and their approach turned out to be the more realistic and efficient. Their front-mounted straight 8-cylinder engine developed 325 horsepower, which was around 100 per litre, more than any other engine at the time. The 1934 W125 was also the first Grand Prix car to be equipped with independent suspension and hydraulic brakes. The German steamroller, enjoying greater investment than ever before, began to obliterate the lightweight French and Italian opposition in the second half of the 1934 season. The age of the Silver Arrows was nigh. The auto unions, however, were very difficult to drive. Dr. Porsche had been right to mount the engine behind the driver, but he was many years too early. It would be another 25 years before Cooper got it right and won with this layout. But the two German firms continued their private rivalry and spent vast quantities of money in their attempt to reap the rich rewards promised by Hitler for the best German Grand Prix car. In 1935, the Mercedes W125 was giving 400 horsepower against the 375 of rivals Auto Union. The next year, however, in spite of more than 500 horsepower and a new, lower and more compact chassis, they were less successful due to a lack of reliability. But they took their revenge in 1937 with an engine pushed to 5.6 litres and now giving more than 650 horsepower. Never before had Grand Prix cars been so quick, now capable of more than 300 kph, nearly 190 mph. But that pushed the governing body to limit engine capacity for the 1938 season.
Mercedes a décidé de faire une 3 litres 12 cylindres avec compresseur et de nouveau il y a eu un pas important dans l'histoire, c'était la première voiture à double compresseur. Donc le 3 litres donnait autour de 400 chevaux à l'époque et je pense déjà on tournait entre 8500 et 9000 tours. Elle consommait, une voiture comme ça, une trentaine de litres d'huile par Grand Prix. Et la consommation de l'essence, qui était une essence très très spéciale, dépassait de loin les 100 litres par 100 km de course.
It was finally the war that brought to an end the fantastic run of success enjoyed by the Mercedes steamroller as they vied with Auto Union for national honour. Between them, they had made the late 30s one of the most remarkable periods in the history of motorsport. After their formidable racing cars had conquered Europe's motor racing circuits, the Third Reich's equally impressive war machine set out to conquer the continent. The great campaign of the Silver Arrows may have reduced Grand Prix racing to Nazi propaganda, but it was also one of the most impressive epochs in motorsport. The final chapter in the saga of Mercedes in Grand Prix racing took place 15 years later, when the W196 revived the Silver Arrows legend at the French Grand Prix at Reims. This time, Mercedes' engineers had gone for innovation to show the entire world that the company had become the prestigious flag bearer of the re-emerging industrial Germany.
Io credo che questa macchina era una macchina di avanzata. È nato dopo la guerra, motore desmodronico, non aveva nessun costinetto di metallo in nessuna parte, vuol dire che non si poteva rompere. E questo è molto importante per un pilota che sa che la macchina non si rompe. Solamente io pensare alla sua persona e portarla in fondo. Sì, sì.
The cars had all-enveloping, streamlined bodywork for fast circuits. The engines featured direct fuel injection, another first, and desmodromic distribution, a rarity. Mercedes was again well-funded and strengthened its chances by employing Juan Manuel Fangio and Sterling Moss, the best two drivers of the time. Immediately, there was no contest. The German cars won 10 of the 12 Grand Prix in which they raced during the 1954 and 1955 seasons. The team, still ruled by the iron hand of Alfred Neubauer, had the great fortune to enjoy much greater finance than that available to its rivals. To ensure its success at any price, Mercedes used a steamroller to overcome rivals which were no greater than mosquitoes. Tragically, in June 1955, a Mercedes sports car left the road at Le Mans and killed nearly 100 spectators. At the end of the season, the German company pulled out of motor racing.